Welcome to Coffee with Catholic Workers, a podcast from and about folks involved in the Catholic worker movement. I'm Theo.
And I'm Lydia. We've both been active in the Catholic Worker for about the past decade, and we're excited to use this time to talk with some of our favorite people in the movement. And so today we actually get to hear from Theo, both a little bit about how he came to be a part of the Catholic worker movement, as well as exploring a little bit of Catholic worker values, focusing today on the value of decentralized power or decentralized society. So, Theo, you've been involved with the Catholic Worker for some time now, a bit over a decade. How did you first get exposed to the Catholic Worker, and how did you get involved?
Well, I first heard about the worker back in my Catholic high school religion class. Catholic Morality and Social Justice was the name of the course. But it was a tamer version of it, I think, than I've come to know the movement to be in my time as a Catholic worker. Um, I don't know. I come grew up in a background kind of where um, everyone went to college, kind of thing, and so after high school, that's just what I did for a little bit. But I got to a point in my life where I wanted to try something completely different. Um, so I dropped out and I found the Los Angeles Catholic Worker on the internet on CatholicWorker.org. Um, I didn't really come to the movement from like a religious or Catholic kind of background, though I did grow up going to Catholic school and stuff like that, like I mentioned. I was a lot more interested in kind of like the anarchist, radical politics, direct action piece of it. I grew up, my dad worked on the assembly line at General Motors, but was also like a union guy. He was vice president of his local, and um, we would like march in the Labor Day parade with the UAW, and he read Marx. Like I still own his copy of Capital. So I had that in my background, and also when I was in high school, I kind of got into punk rock and folk punk specifically, and that really kind of ignited the anarchist thought in me, and uh, kind of gave voice to this idea I had in me, or these thoughts that today I think I would call alienation under capitalism. Though at the time I don't think I really had like a great articulation of these things I was feeling, but maybe that there was more to life than just like getting a job and working for the weekend and your 2 weeks vacation every year kind of thing. Like maybe we could try to live for more than that and try to work towards higher ideals or something like that. And I thought maybe the Catholic worker would be an opportunity to do that. Um, so I found the LA worker online, like I said. I'd never been west before or anything like that. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Um, the Los Angeles Catholic worker, like Catherine talked about on the episode we just recorded with her, uh, runs this big soup kitchen in a place called Skid Row in Los Angeles. And LA is kind of the capital of homelessness in the US, you might say. and Skid Row is this area of like 50 square blocks near downtown where there's literally thousands of folks living on the street. And I figured I'd be jumping right into it. They ran this soup kitchen down there. The hippie kitchen is what folks on the street call it because it was started in 1970. Everyone had long hair and they were talking about peace and love and stuff like that. Uh, so I thought it would be an adventure. And I didn't really, I don't think I really knew what I was going to be getting into or that I would still be doing it all these years later. But just a few days after my 20th birthday, I caught the train out to California and have been doing this Catholic workers thing ever since then, I guess.
So what was it? That's what sort of attracted you and drew you there, but what kept you? What about the LA worker was like, okay, this is what feels right?
I don't that's a tough question. I guess I did find it to be meaningful and like other of our guests on the show have talked about, I did I did think there's something wrong with how we organize our world. Why there are few people who have so much and then other folks who just have so little. And I was drawn to the Catholic worker um, because of that dual critiquing the dominant culture, but also helping folks directly who are targeted by that system. And that two pronged approach uh, was just something that really resonated with me, you know, um, including I mean I think doing the works of mercy too. Like I knew some radical folks, and like I said, I knew Christian folks. I grew up in Catholic land, and neither one of them, neither one of those two groups did it seem like we're going out and actually like helping people, like living out
Mm.
these beliefs. And so, yeah, I just really like that about the Catholic worker, and I like the people too. I've met so many awesome folks in the Catholic worker movement. Uh, since I spent a number of years in LA, but I also lived in community in St. Louis at the Karen House and Cherith Brook in Kansas City and elsewhere, and have had the opportunity to travel and see other places. And it would be tough to find a better group of people, I think.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
just relationship too.
Yeah, yeah. There's this interesting piece of in like theological terms we would talk about like orthodoxy and orthopraxy of it, we have these ideals or beliefs and it's something different. We can have orthodox belief without orthopraxy or like the actual doing of the beliefs. And there is this unique piece of the Catholic worker where it's very focused on both like the theory, the belief, but then also the actual practice of it, of what is it that we're doing now to live into it. Which I think I found the Aims and Means to be really unique with that, of the way it's laid out is sort of in three sections of this piece of this is what we see wrong in the world, this is what we're aspiring to, and this is how we think we can do it. Um, and so one of the values that we're going to look at today is the aim towards a decentralized society. So I'm going to read right here the actual paragraph from the aims and means. And so there's a little preamble to it saying this is sort of what we're moving towards or trying to aspire to. So then this section says a decentralized society. In contrast to the present bigness of government, industry, education, healthcare, and agriculture, we encourage efforts such as family farms, rural and urban land trusts, worker ownership and management of small factories, homesteading projects, food, housing, and other cooperatives, any effort in which money can once more become merely a medium of exchange and human beings are no longer commodities. So what does this mean practically for the Catholic worker or for you?
Oh man. Yeah, I think again, I keep wanting to write this article, but I think the Catholic worker is like the punk rock of Christianity. Like I came from that, and there is like this ethos of decentralization. They talk about DIY, do it yourself, like putting on a show in your basement, or starting your own record label, or making your own clothes. Like so often we in society are excluded from participation in any kind of real way and are meant to be like passive in a lot of ways. Uh, just as producers and consumers, like workplaces are often not very democratic. You don't have a say in how things are run. Um, Entertainment is not participatory. Like it's meant to be consumed, and in both like the Catholic worker and in punk rock, like it's encouraged that like everyone should be participants, and you don't have to be an expert. Like you can just go do it. Um, and so yeah, I think that was again something that drew me to the Catholic worker is like you didn't need to be somebody with like the right kind of credentials or anything like that to go out and make the world a better place. Like I was saying, I came to the worker as like a 20-year-old, and I didn't know anything, and I maybe I still don't, but like I could chop lettuce and I could mop the floor, and eventually I learned to cook the beans or whatever. But like I could like actively participate in something worthwhile. Um, and that was something I really liked about the movement. But like, yeah, we live under capitalism too, which I think is an important part of this, where like things are continually more and more centralized, and that has negative effects for all of us in many ways. I mean, one of the ideals of the Catholic worker movement, part of this decentralized society, is like spreading around the means of production into the hands of as many folks as possible. Um, in our world, there are very few owners out there. You know, the 1% really do own like a huge chunk of everything, and the top like 10% own almost everything. You know, and so like wealth is concentrated at the top because of that. Our freedom and ability to like make meaningful choices uh, in our lives are is hampered. You know, like culture is erased. You know, it like in our continually more centralized society. Like even just looking at the United States, like there used to be like regional foods and stuff like that, and now it's kind of replaced by McDonald's or whatever everywhere you go. And we're seeing that like on a global scale too, and there's so much meaning we miss out on because of stuff like that, and so many like opportunities to fully participate. um, that's just a few thoughts. I don't know, it's a big subject. What do you think about the decentralized society?
Yeah, that's a lot there to unpack. I am curious how many Catholic workers identify as punk rockers. I think that should be a poll we should send out, self-identification. Um, it is interesting with decentralized society and the move towards centralization. Right now, I teach some courses at a university in Iowa, and many of the students are coming from family backgrounds that have been involved with farming or agriculture. And even in rural areas, we see like this push towards centralization of farmland from family farms being bought up, family farms no longer being able to be profitable. And large corporations or even very large multinational corporations being the ones who end up owning all of the farmland. And it is really interesting because the students strongly identify with farming as like heritage or identity or culture. And there is that piece of that is disappearing. And when I think of this idea of decentralized society, to me, some of the value it brings is this focus that's sort of balanced with personalism, another value of the Catholic worker of trying to allow humans to live fully into their humanity, rather than sort of being pushed to the side by growth. Um, to me, I think we see that same thing, and where the Catholic worker helps sort of push back against it, at least for the houses of hospitality, is in some of like the what is sometimes termed the nonprofit industrial complex of people who are struggling now becoming just another number or a statistics to be able to get a grant, and having these boundaries that we create rather than relationships, and recognizing the struggles that people may be going through. Um, yeah, it's a big topic though, not not a simple one. So you've recently been traveling around a bit. What are some examples you've seen of different ways that Catholic workers live into this ideal, or maybe don't?
Yeah, well, I think that non-profit industrial complex piece plays into the way a lot of Catholic workers think. Like, just as, under capitalism, like the corporations are increasingly large and impersonal, so are the ways we do charity or helping one another out, supposedly, and it is like detrimental to a lot of the things that like make us human, like relationship and stuff like that. And so many Catholic workers are like very intentionally like we're not going to do that. We're going to try and be the opposite of that. I was just reading Dorothy Day uh, recently, and she was talking about people critiquing her like, well, couldn't you do more if you became more institutional or whatever? And she's like, maybe, but like, could we do it with more love, was the question she wanted to ask, and her conclusion was no. And so yeah, like you don't need to be a specialist and have a special degree. Like, part of the big thing about the Catholic worker is that like all of us as Christians or even just people of goodwill are supposed to be doing this work. I was talking to Matt from the LA Worker at the recent Worcester National Gathering, and he likes to point out, I guess, that like there's tens of thousands of homeless folks in LA, but there's like millions of Catholics. So like if every like 50 Catholics or whatever got together and supported one homeless person, like that would take care of the problem. And really, that's like the ideal in many ways of the Catholic worker movement is that we all get together and do that work. When how it plays out in real life will vary from Catholic worker to Catholic worker. Part of that decentralization, is that there is no central office. There is no one deciding who is or is not a Catholic worker. If you and your friends or your spouse or just you alone want to go out and call yourself a Catholic worker and start doing the works of mercy and critiquing and challenging the filthy, rotten system, you can do that, and it'll look at different everywhere people are. Um, so one of the ideals of the Catholic worker is that you just kind of where you're starting from with what you have and what's around you, you do what's needed. So I like to talk about the Cherith Brook Catholic worker in Kansas City, where they decided they were going to start a Catholic worker there, and they looked around and saw, oh, well, there's plenty of places where folks can get a decent meal, but there's nowhere really to get a good shower. So they're like, let's do showers. Maybe in other cities that isn't the greatest need. Some places look around and they see, oh, it's a difficulty for families who are experiencing homelessness to stay together. We should open a project where we serve that need. In Milwaukee, they were seeing families struggling, dealing with the Department of Family Services or whatever. And so they opened up a house specifically to like provide a secure place for mothers who are navigating getting their children back through that system. And that is like one of the strengths of the Catholic worker is like its adaptability because of this decentralization. Like you can just do what needs to be done, uh, and the people there doing the work just go out and do it.
I think one of the things you said that really resonates with me is both this idea that sort of people ideally should love others as like this core tenet of Christianity, and this idea of like when we look at issues of homelessness or poverty, and then we look at the number of people who identify as Catholic or Christian, there is sometimes this disconnect of sort of responsibility, or not even necessarily responsibility, but care for others. And really seems like a lot of times it's easy to sort of outsource it to the centralized powers of kind of saying, oh, social services will take care of that, or the government will take care of that. And not that those are bad things, but it distances ourselves from needing to actually interact with others or love others.
Yeah. And I mean, the Catholic workers are big fans of the 25th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, where it's Jesus's only like judgment parable there. And he says how we treat other people, how we treat other people directly is like how we will be quote unquote judged. And he says to folks like, I was hungry and you gave me some food, or I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, or I was homeless and you gave me a house. And the people say, when did we ever see you homeless? And Jesus says, well, whatever you did for somebody who was needing those things, you were doing it for me. And a lot of Catholic workers will point out, it doesn't say like, I was hungry and you gave some money to an institution who fed me after paying like a CEO and stuff and you know advertising fees and stuff like that. It's like, no, you just like went out and did it. And it is it can be a difficult thing too at the Catholic worker movement. Like it in the Catholic worker, many of us live with folks who have experienced challenges like homelessness and sometimes and the accompanying problems with that. Um, and so we're like sharing meals with those folks, and getting to know them. Uh, like living with people can be like an intimate thing. Um, and we're taught in our society like you shouldn't want to live with other people really. And I mean I would suggest that's some sort of capitalist construct to like get us to buy more houses and TVs and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I mean it requires like being vulnerable and loving other people and being loved and being accountable to them in different ways that doesn't exist when you have like a professional relationship, like is the ideal of so many nonprofits and stuff. And again, I don't want to slam nonprofits or other folks trying to help out there. The problem's really big that we're facing right now. And there aren't like unlimited Catholic workers out there doing this work, unfortunately. So we do need to have a multi front uh, project going on, probably. But yeah, I mean, just that's one thing about the Catholic worker is uh, we set aside that institutional relationship as best we can, and we're not perfect in that regard either. To love people more directly.
I should probably clarify for our listeners. I am a social worker, so I do have experience for the past oh 11, 12 years or so working for nonprofits and social service agencies. And it is a very different relationship to be working with clients who we have very specific boundaries with compared to then being able to go home and live with people who, in a different context, it would be wrong of me ethically to kind of have a conversation outside of work conversations with. And so it's a very interesting juxtaposition of both knowing um, knowing in roles of social work that that can never meet all of a person's need, and at the same time it's the role of a Catholic worker knowing that yeah, we don't currently have enough people willing to jump on the movement to really support people in the ways that they need to be supported. So I think one critique of decentralization is that sometimes there's really, really big problems. And how do we solve really, really big problems without a centralized strategy? So I'm thinking specifically um, in our current issues of things like climate change. And so some of the strategy to push back against our climate emergency is these concentrated efforts to push for centralized federal policy changes, in particular to limit emissions for corporations or to increase incentives for things that will reduce carbon emissions. What does it look like to have a decentralized approach with some things that are just really large?
Yeah, that's that's a tough one, and I think it is very much worth thinking about. Um, I don't know if I have a real great answer. I do think it is worth pointing out how this like culture of centralized power and wealth extraction has like created so many of the problems that we see, including climate change. And like I would talk about like the environmental catastrophe even more broadly than like global emissions and the climate change that has happened because of that, though that is quite all encompassing. But just like, that the US military is one of like the biggest polluters out there and how the federal government subsidizes these extractive industries and stuff like that. So many of these policies, too, while they do address that piece of emissions and warming because of it, they also rely on damaging local communities in other ways. Like it still requires like extractive industries to build batteries for electric cars. And too often, like those heavy metals and stuff are found on indigenous land and people have to be removed and stuff like that. So like it is a problem in many ways, like wrought by centralization. And like you mentioned farming earlier, like our continually centralized food production system. Like that's a huge cause of the problems we find ourselves in, that like fewer people are producing for themselves and instead we rely on this like petrochemical heavy process that is not only creates emissions but like poisons our water and erodes our topsoil, and like that's like a direct cause uh from that is caused directly by like centralization, um and stuff like that. So I do think we need a to take like a bigger view of things as we look at how we got into this situation. um but yeah, I mean, we do live in a world where like centralized states and corporations like wield immense power, and maybe we do need to think about curtailing that power or wielding it in certain ways, at least in the immediate future, as we confront these issues. Peter Morin says in one of his easy essays, like, we need idealists to show what idealism looks like when lived out. And I think that is valuable in that, like, folks from a background such as mine and many US Americans, like, will need to learn to live with less uh, consumption. Like, maybe we can't all have SUVs, and maybe we can't have a computer and a TV computer and a cell phone computer and a car computer and stuff like that. So I do think that there is value in thinking about and maybe even living out these life ways. But I do question, like, is that idealists showing idealism, is that going to make enough difference as like we face a climate cliff in like 6 years or whatever?
Yeah. What tension to live into. This clash of ideals and practicality. I do feel like this is always the tension within the Catholic worker of having these really strong ideals. And at the same time, it's really hard to live them out in a way that feels like it's making a difference or preventing enough harm. Um, really complicated to try to pin that down.
I was at one of the Midwest Catholic worker like anti-racism Midwest gatherings we did a few years ago, and I was talking to a Catholic worker about anarchism specifically, which is a word Dorothy Day used to describe her political beliefs, and ties into this decentralized society. And he was talking about a friend of his who was sharing some knowledge, and his friend said they thought about it as like getting like civil rights legislation passed at a federal level was like a good thing, and that like it would not work as well to try and go around and like non-violently tried to convince every racist sheriff in the South to like stop being violent. Like that was like a real practical, centralized decision that was good for people. And he was saying that this friend of his, who was themselves a radical, though not a Catholic worker, was in their area working for a like police oversight uh, board of some sort, like a civilian oversight board that could hopefully like curtail police misconduct. And this friend of his was that made the point that like I know that this civilian oversight board is not going to be the end. Like this is not the end goal itself. But like maybe in this moment, if it like helps keep somebody from being beat up or killed by a cop or something like that, like it is like a practical step. And while it's not the revolution we ultimately hope for, maybe it is an important thing to do in our current context. And so like that is something I think about too.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow, lots of good thoughts. No solid answers, but lots of good thoughts. Well, Theo, I'd like to move into our brand new lightning round of questions, the point in time in which we get to quiz our interviewees on random things. So I've got three questions here for you, Theo. What is your favorite easy essay?
Oh man, I've read all the easy essays. I have Lincoln's book and I've read them all twice, in fact. I don't know if I have a favorite. The one I've thought about a lot lately is there's one in which he says, we need houses of hospitality for unemployed college graduates so that they can come and be radicalized basically and have their needs met while they learn about uh, why things are the way they are and how we could get them to where we need them to be. So I've been thinking about that one, and I've been wondering about if in our current context we need houses of hospitality specifically for over indebted college graduates.
Hmm. Yes, very true. All right, favorite author or two authors if you can't pin it down to one.
Oh, I don't know if I have a favorite author. Um, I have in my life read almost all the novels of John Steinbeck, one
Mm-hmm.
time or another. And East of Eden is probably my favorite novel by him. My favorite kind of nerdy theology book is by William Stringfellow in Ethic for Christians and Other Aliens and Strange. I like him. Daniel Berrigan was arrested at his house when he was on the run from the FBI.
Nice. All right, you've got a combination of 25 volunteers and guests that you need to feed. What do you make them?
Oh well, in real life, I make whatever's in the fridge. I've gotten pretty good at the Catholic worker, make what you have. I like to joke it's almost like the Iron Chef if you've ever seen that TV show where they have to cook a full meal with one random ingredient. So I have gotten pretty good at cooking with whatever we have.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Theo, for taking the time to be a guest here on our podcast. That wraps up for us another episode of Coffee with Catholic Workers. We want to thank Chris from the Bloomington Catholic Worker for help with editing, David Hayes for our music, and if any of you all would like to reach out to us with comments, suggestions, clarification of thought that you'd like to share with us, you can email us at coffeewithcatholicworkers@gmail.com.
Thanks for joining us again for some clarification of thought. We hope today's conversation and discussion have been enlightening, and maybe even that you're encouraged to go out and help build a world where it's easier to be good.